There are places on Earth that seem forgotten by time and hidden from most eyes. These are territories where nature retains its primeval power and the conditions for existence sometimes seem impossible. From barren icy valleys to tropical highlands, each of these corners holds its own unique story. In this episode, we will embark on a journey through the most remote and unusual places on Earth. Enjoy watching. When, in 1963, an underwater volcano erupted southwest of the Vestmannaeyja archipelago, no one could have imagined that it would give our planet a new island, Surtsey, which still exists today. From 1963 to 67, lava from the volcanoes almost continuously erupted and solidified, forming a new island. Initially, its area was 2.7 square kilometers, but today it has shrunk to nearly half, to 1.4, due to coastal erosion. In addition to Surtsey, several other land islets formed during the same period, but they were quickly broken down by wind and waves to the point that not a trace of them remains. Scientists treated the emergence of Surtsey as a gift from nature and decided to study how life would develop on the island naturally without human interference. For this purpose, Surtsey was included in the UNESCO World Heritage List, and access to the territory is strictly limited. Only a small group of scientists is allowed to step onto this land solely for the purpose of observing the development of the island's ecosystem, and they are prohibited from bringing even foreign bacteria, which incidentally appeared there immediately. At first, lichens and mosses began to grow on the island, but now one can find even flowering and shrubby plants brought in by migratory birds. By the way, birds were the first to spread plant seeds when they generously fertilized the new land with their waste. Now, seabirds often nest on Surtsey, rapidly advancing the development of the local ecosystem. However, the erosion process of the volcanic island cannot be stopped. The more time passes, the more the top layer of soil will be washed away until only the most durable rock fragments of Surtsey remain. According to scientists, this process is unlikely to take more than 100 years, and once it concludes, it will be possible to say that the island will begin its second, longer life. Sometimes, to study certain atmospheric and cosmic phenomena in detail, not only highly qualified scientists are required, but also special observation stations that meet the necessary requirements. To study ocean life, they are built underwater. To research the Earth, the planet is drilled deep. But for observing the atmosphere and space, even before the first flight, special conditions were needed, and the South Pole was perfectly suited for them. In 1956, the United States landed in Antarctica for the first time in almost half a century and began construction of the South Pole Station, now known as Amundsen Scott. In order to prevent American claims to the rich mineral deposits beneath the Antarctic ice, the Antarctic Treaty was signed in 1959, declaring the South Pole a zone free from national claims. All natural resources, as well as the stations already built in Antarctica, were to serve the benefit of all humanity and not allow the knowledge obtained to be claimed by any one country. However, the operation of the facilities and the carrying out of observations required people, and those people became researchers who regularly reside at the station in extremely harsh weather conditions. In the cold season, temperatures can drop to very extreme levels, so it's no surprise that nothing grows and no one lives here except for insects highly resistant to the cold climate. Apart from the people who arrive specifically to service the station and the dogs that come with them, only migratory birds occasionally fly over Antarctica and can enjoy the icy beauty of the South Pole along with them. During the age of great geographical discoveries, only the laziest maritime power failed to send an expedition around the world. Naturally, the undisputed leader was Great Britain, but France was not eager to fall behind its neighboring rival and also claimed a piece of land on the other side of the planet in the Indian Ocean. The discoverer of this future French territory was Yves-Joseph de Kerguelen, whose name now belongs to the entire archipelago. In 1772, he first spotted this land and a year later returned to it again, but his foot never touched the ground. Upon returning to France, Kerguelen was held accountable for the death of several sailors and for concealing the truth about his first voyage, for which he was, in a sense, stripped of the honor of being considered the discoverer. In 1776, the Briton James Cook arrived at the newly discovered land and, contrary to the initial belief that it was part of a continent, determined it was an island, naming it Desolation Island. Until the 20th century, people hunted whales and seals on this remote land, driving marine animals to the brink of extinction. During World War II, these islands were often used by German forces, and to prevent their safe anchorage in quiet waters, the Australians heavily mined the archipelago. Some of these explosive military artifacts remained there until the 1950s. Today, several research bases have been built on the main island of the archipelago, so it is no surprise that about 100 station staff periodically reside on Kerguelen. Overall, the islands are quite suitable for living, although the weather conditions are rather cool year-round. Originally, there were no land animals on Kerguelen, only marine species such as penguins, seals, and birds. However, with the arrival of humans, rabbits, cats, and even sheep were introduced into the local ecosystem. The latter had to be eradicated because they threatened to completely wipe out local endemic plants, such as Kerguelen cabbage. The fertility of the local soil can be easily explained by the fact that millions of years ago, the archipelago was part of a vast volcanic plateau, now submerged under the sea, and the islands that remain above the surface are merely the peaks of sunken volcanoes. The tiny village of Oymyakon, located near the Arctic Circle in the Oymyakonsky district of the Republic of Saha, is a place where every resident daily challenges the harsh climate and nature, stubbornly refusing to leave a decidedly unfriendly territory with brutal weather conditions. This place is known worldwide as the coldest inhabited location on the planet. Though the local population is quite small, only about 500 people in the entire village, they steadfastly defend their right to exist in the face of nature itself. It is impossible to say exactly when Oymyakon came into being. Originally, this area was a stopover site for the Yakuts, who raised reindeer, but with the arrival of Soviet rule, their nomadic lifestyle came to an end. The herders were required to choose a permanent place to live, and that place became the village, surrounded on all sides by mountains through which unfrozen streams flow. The name Oymyakon in the Avan language translates as unfrozen water and the place where fish winter. Perhaps that is why the main diet for the Yakuts and Russians who arrived in the village after being exiled from Siberia consisted of stroganina made from fish and meat. Unfortunately, with such a climate, becoming a vegetarian is not an option as the summer is short and rather cool, making agriculture pointless, so one has to collect nature's gifts in the surrounding forests. The locals are also unlucky with other benefits of civilization. Central heating is meaningless in permafrost conditions, and the water supply only works in the summer months. In winter, the water in the pipes freezes solid. Incidentally, local residents also never turn off their car engines for the same reason. In minus 50 degrees Celsius, restarting them simply won't work. As for what happens to a person in such temperatures, it's not hard to imagine, so one can only envy the strength of spirit of Oymyakon's inhabitants. Incredibly far from the United Kingdom, almost in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, lies the most remote settlement of the kingdom, occupying the territory of Pitcairn Island. In fact, this name hides as many as 5 islands, but only one is permanently inhabited. As of 2021, Pitcairn was considered the least populated territory in the world, as at that time the number of local residents was limited to 47 people. Currently, this number fluctuates around 50 people, changing from year to year. The everyday life of the locals cannot be called easy. Until 2002, there was no electricity on the islands, and access to the internet and other benefits of civilization is still extremely limited. However, all this is not as interesting as the history of this place itself. The islands were first discovered in 1606 by the Portuguese navigator Pedro Fernandes de Queiroz, but at that time, apart from naming them, there was no development or annexation of these territories to Portugal. In 1767, the islands were rediscovered by British officer Philip Carteret, who again named them, but this time with an English flair, although he did not even attempt to land due to the complex coastline around Pitcairn. The first settlers on the previously uninhabited island appeared only more than 20 years later, when the British ship Bounty, operated by mutineers, transported captured Tahitian women here, and the crew decided to settle on this territory. For over 20 years, all the inhabitants fought, seizing power from one another and, in parallel, giving birth to children. When Captain Folger's ship arrived on the island in 1808, he found only 9 adults, among whom was only 1 man, and 25 children of mixed race born from the union of Britons with Tahitian women. Only in 1838 did Pitcairn come under the control of the United Kingdom, becoming its colony, and it was the only place where democratic governance was established, allowing women to vote. When the population on the inhabited island became excessive, some residents decided to move to neighboring Norfolk, but after founding another settlement there, some returned back to Pitcairn. It was only in 1914 that a transport route to the islands was established from New Zealand, and at that time the number of arrivals sharply increased. Some even decided to permanently move to live on Pitcairn, becoming part of this place. Since ancient times, people have dreamed of the Golden City, called it El Dorado, and believed it was located somewhere in South America. Surprisingly, the myths were partially true, because in Peru there is indeed such a small town called La Rinconada, only the legends came true in exactly the opposite way. This settlement was founded when gold was discovered on the slope of the Andes, practically on the border between Bolivia and Peru. A stream of gold seekers immediately rushed to the area, hoping to get rich overnight. It can't be denied that some did manage to accomplish this and quickly established a kind of monopoly on the extraction of natural wealth, of course, bypassing government authority. Having taken control of the emerging town, these same people who had recently been miners imposed rules resembling slave labor conditions for their less fortunate colleagues. Now, all miners work for free for a whole month, but they are given a chance to get rich when on one day they can keep all the gold they find. It is a pure lottery in which only a few win, while the rest are forced to live far below the poverty line for a very long time. However, in La Rinconada, poverty is just one facet of hell. To begin with, the settlement is built at an altitude of over 5,000 meters above sea level, so the air is extremely thin. Accordingly, the temperature barely rises above freezing during the day, and at night it completely freezes the metal shacks where the miners huddle. There's no point talking about minimal comforts. The only infrastructure here is relatively recently installed electricity, which works intermittently, and a single decent central road. For a city with a population approaching 50,000 people, such conditions are unacceptably bad, and yet people continue to arrive in the hope of a better life. But as if that weren't enough, the air, soil, and water here are poisoned with mercury vapors used to purify mined gold from impurities. Needless to say, the lives of locals are short and quite miserable. All that the exhausted miners can do is drink away their hard-earned pennies in taverns and visit entertainment houses. Incidentally, women in La Rinconada are even less fortunate. They are not allowed to work in the mines at all, so all that remains for them is to pan for traces of gold in the river and work in those very entertainment houses. Partly for this reason, all the locals have a lavish bouquet of diseases of varying severity and at best live to the age of 50, but more often even less. The uninhabited Bouvet Island can rightfully be considered a sort of gateway to Antarctica, which inevitably imposes a seal of solitude on it. Despite its tiny size and rather tangled history, this territory holds mysteries hidden beneath the veil of mist, just like the island itself. This piece of land, reliably covered in snow, was first discovered in 1739 by the Frenchman Bouvet de Lozier, who made a couple of fatal mistakes that led to the island being discovered several times. First, he assumed that the land he found, hidden behind thick fog, was part of a hypothetically existing continent, which led him to name the island the Cape of the Circumcision of the Lord. But that wasn't all. When marking it on the map, he made a slight miscalculation and indicated incorrect longitude coordinates, which led James Cook, who followed the records, to find only open ocean with no sign of land. In 1808, the island was rediscovered by James Lindsay, who named it after himself, but did not land. In 1825, the British claimed the land, about 10 years after conquering Tristan da Cunha, the nearest archipelago to this location, and named it Liverpool Island. In 1927, the crew of a Norwegian ship declared Bouvet Island part of Norway, which led to certain political issues between Norway, the United Kingdom, and unexpectedly the USSR, since the Norwegians also declared Peter I Island, almost a part of Antarctica, as their territory. While a compromise with England was reached quickly and Bouvet was annexed by Norway, the claims to Peter I Island are not recognized by most countries due to the 1959 Antarctic Treaty. Today, the island can be reached by air or, if lucky, by sea. Although there is no permanent population, there is an automatic weather station that records wind conditions. There is virtually no vegetation or wildlife, except for migratory birds and occasionally visiting seals. However, in 1964, a boat was unexpectedly found on the island, packed with supplies but without any trace of who it belonged to or where it came from. And in 1979, thermal flashes were recorded on Bouvet, initially thought to be nuclear explosions. But the truth was much simpler. It was the movement of magma flows in the caldera of a volcano that had been dormant for a couple of millennia, of which Bouvet Island is essentially the summit. Socotra can perhaps be called the most alien archipelago of our world. This relatively small territory was once part of the African continent, but as a result of a natural cataclysm, broke away approximately 6 million years ago and drifted 350 kilometers from the shore into the open ocean. Interestingly, this land sailed away with a cargo of plants and animals living there, which over the millions of years have developed along a completely different path from their continental relatives. Thus, the island turned into a complete ecosystem, seemingly cut off from the rest of the world, with its endemics and unique landscapes. Even in ancient times, Socotra was inhabited, as confirmed by finds from the Olduvai culture dated to nearly 1.5 million years ago. In the ancient world, the archipelago held great value due to its rare resources, such as a unique variety of aloe, dragon tree resin, and marine gifts, black pearls, and ambergris. Socotra came under the rule of Hadramaut, Alexander the Great, sultans, the Portuguese, pirates, and many others. Today, the archipelago is governed by the authorities of Yemen, making all island residents citizens of this country. In addition to Socotra, local people have also settled on the islands of Abd al-Khoury and Samha, leaving Darsa, Sabunia, and Kalfiran uninhabited. In total, less than 100,000 people live on the territory of the archipelago, and they all speak the Socotri language, which belongs to the Semitic family, though many also speak Arabic. The Socotri dialect had no written form until recently, when it was developed by Russian scientists. The entire cultural heritage of Socotra is a vast body of oral stories and songs, traditionally passed down from generation to generation. Although the islands have practically no amenities such as running water or electricity, the local residents have long been accustomed to their way of life and live peacefully, fishing, raising livestock, and collecting all the natural gifts that the archipelago provides. The most isolated active volcano on our planet is located in Antarctica on Ross Island and is called Mount Erebus. Although this natural formation is smaller in size than its neighboring peaks that make up the Vinson Massif and is far from the only volcano on the island, Erebus still deserves close scientific attention. To begin with, this volcano is not just active, but continuously active since 1972, which by the way has a negative impact on the planet's ozone layer. Over Ross Island, the ozone is thinnest precisely because of the constant eruptions. Frequent emissions of methane and hydrogen not only destroy ozone in the stratosphere, but have also caused the formation of ice fumaroles, naturally occurring towers of frozen steam that stand out starkly against the endless icy expanses of the island. Scientists are also greatly interested in the lava lake formed as a result of magma accumulation in the volcano's crater. Mount Erebus was discovered by British polar explorer James Clark Ross, after whom the island itself was named. Without much hesitation, he named the two mountains he found Erebus and Terror after the ships on which his team sailed to the island. Despite the scientists' great interest, there is a dark chapter in the history of Erebus involving the ill-fated Flight 901 of a New Zealand airline which crashed into the mountainside due to poor visibility, killing all 257 passengers. Currently, flights over Ross Island are prohibited to prevent a recurrence of such a tragedy. In the eastern part of Greenland, among picturesque fjords, hides one of the coldest and most inaccessible settlements on the planet, Ittoqqortoormiit. Before receiving its Greenlandic name, this place was called Scoresbysund in honor of the discoverer William Scoresby, who marked this territory on maps in 1822. Despite its obvious inaccessibility, this region is not completely isolated from the world. It is quite easy to reach Ittoqqortoormiit by air, thanks to a helicopter pad located near the settlement year-round and during thaw periods, when the fjords are not bound by ice by boat. In addition to the rather modest population of the town, consisting of about 350 people, the local nature is quite rich in various wildlife and includes such exotic creatures as narwhals, seals, walruses, polar bears, musk oxen, and Arctic foxes. When the first settlers, mostly from among the Inuit, first arrived in this area, they became quite wealthy by hunting animals and selling their catch on the mainland. Moreover, earlier in this area of Greenland, Inuit tribes had already lived, as evidenced by various ruins and archaeological finds. Nowadays, Ittoqqortoormiit has become quite an attractive spot for active and extreme tourism. In addition to the impressive landscapes of the fjords, the area around the town is strewn with mountains, and possible encounters with wild animals only increase the interest of explorers. Where do you think the driest desert in the world is located? The answer may surprise you because this place is in Antarctica and it is called the McMurdo Dry Valleys. Geographically, they are located in Victoria Land, one of the regions of Antarctica. According to the treaty signed in 1959, this place is beyond the jurisdiction of any country and cannot be claimed. However, studying McMurdo is not prohibited and there is much to explore here. According to scientists, the atmosphere of the dry valleys is the closest on Earth to the conditions of Mars, which is why NASA once used them to test the Viking space probes. The special conditions of this place are achieved due to katabatic winds, blowing at speeds of up to 150 km per hour and evaporating any water that lands on the ground of McMurdo. That is why snow and ice are almost never found here, though there are several hypersaline lakes. A vivid example of such bodies of water is Lake Vida, which has a permanent ice crust 21 meters thick. However, all the water below this layer has a temperature of minus 13 degrees Celsius, but still remains in a liquid state. This is possible due to the excessive salt content, 7 times higher than in seawater. Aside from extremely resilient endolithic bacteria, no other life exists in this place. Moreover, regions with constant snow have more life than the McMurdo Dry Valleys, which makes this place so unique for our planet. It has historically happened that people tend to settle along the banks of oceans and rivers. Understandably so. Sources of fresh water have always been and will always be what attracts both people and animals. And the land of the Amazon, crisscrossed by water arteries, became a magnet for settlers even in ancient times. However, with the development of civilization, many tribes hidden in the lush forests of the Amazon were left out. Rare encounters with the outside world generally brought only suffering and senseless death. Explorers and conquerors of lands ruthlessly enslaved the natives, introduced modern weapons and diseases into their traditional way of life. It is precisely for this reason that Vale do Javari in the heart of Brazil became the largest reservation in the world, with a territory comparable to modern Austria. Previously, around 4 million people lived here, but after the disasters brought by the outside world, the population was drastically reduced to several thousand aborigines. Some of them belong to the uncontacted tribes, meaning that it is legally prohibited to approach them. The only way to study their lifestyle is through drone footage, which not only helps monitor the condition of the tribes, but also follows for timely detection of illegal activities by various organizations aiming to log forests or enslave the indigenous population. Though their lives may seem wild to the modern person, these tribes have preserved their customs and traditions far longer than we might think, which is why Vale do Javari is rightfully considered their land, a land that should not be claimed by others. Located at the intersection point of 3 countries, Mount Roraima can rightfully be called one of the most isolated places on our planet. Formally, this natural landmark simultaneously belongs to Brazil, Guyana, and Venezuela, but no one can definitively say where exactly the border between the countries lies. The fact is that the height of this mountain is 2,723 meters above sea level, and the path to the summit is not something just anyone can conquer. In addition to sheer cliffs composed of Precambrian rocks, which are over 2 billion years old, the road to the sky plateau is seriously complicated by weather conditions that seem intentionally designed to stop travelers. Only those in excellent physical shape are capable of making the journey. Incidentally, Arthur Conan Doyle was one of them, and the inspiration he found on the plateau gave the world the science fiction novel The Lost World. Those who reach the summit are greeted by a piece of unique nature cut off from the world, with unusual plants and even rare animals. One such endemic species is the Guyana harlequin frog, whose evolutionary path did not teach it to jump, but which can quickly escape danger by curling into a ball and rolling away like a bun. The local flora is also impressive, especially with its penchant for consuming insects, as the soil of the plateau is very poor in micronutrients. Although most people can only admire Roraima from its base, this place truly deserves attention and detailed study. In the untouched wilderness of the Tibetan Plateau hides one of the most isolated places on our planet where people live, Motuo. In addition to a very modest population of the only human village for many kilometers, these territories boast the impressive beauty of pristine nature. Most of the surrounding land is occupied by northern tropical forests that have appeared here thanks to air masses coming from the Indian Ocean. In these rich natural treasure troves, wild orchids and ferns peacefully grow, many of which are endemic to this area. Apparently, because it has always been difficult for people to get to Motuo, the ecosystem in the forest developed independently and was completely unaffected by human activity. Partly due to the fact that this area was long considered sacred and was often called the road to paradise. Just a couple of decades ago, the only way to Motuo was via a weathered suspension bridge installed more than 100 years ago. Only in the last decade was a proper road laid to the settlement, through which endless streams of explorers and scientists immediately poured in, eager to study the local forests for new species of plants and animals. The grasping claws of the British Empire, once ruling over the seas and oceans of the entire planet, reached even the secluded archipelago in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. The inhabited island of Tristan da Cunha has been part of the overseas territory of St. Helena Ascension and Tristan da Cunha since 1816. At that time, British dominance over the seas was nearly absolute, and they wasted no time in annexing new lands to their territories. However, the real history of this archipelago begins in 1506, when Tristan da Cunha spotted the islands and boldly gave them his name. However, he didn't set foot on the named land and sailed back to Portugal. In 1810, Jonathan Lambert, an American from Massachusetts, settled on the island and claimed the territory for his own country, which he founded right there. The state of the Island of Refreshment lasted for about 5 years, 3 of which passed under the rule of Lambert, who died in 1812. After the British annexed the territory, 15 people settled on the island, 8 men and 7 women. They became the ancestors of almost all the islanders living there today. Currently, life on the island, though rather hermit-like, is not without the benefits of civilization. There is electricity and internet, and the open ocean nearby always offers an abundance of seafood, while the fertile soil generously yields potato harvests for people and grass for livestock. By the way, Tristan da Cunha is a volcanic island. Queen Mary's Peak erupts once every few years, flooding the land with lava, which positively affects crop yields, although it also brings many problems to the locals. In 1961, the eruption was especially destructive, and the islanders were evacuated to the United Kingdom and to St. Helena, but after a couple of years, almost all the residents returned to their homes, bringing with them new settlers from the mainland. Aside from the inhabited Tristan da Cunha, the other territories of the archipelago have been declared nature reserves due to the abundance of endemic species among both plants and animals. The most famous among them are the crested penguin and the Tristan thrush, a tiny flightless bird. Although the remoteness of the island brings certain inconveniences, including supply routes that force ships with provisions to travel nearly a week across the ocean, the archipelago has a certain charm that makes the locals love this land and consider it their home. And that's all from me. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon. Your activity is the best reward for me. Thank you for watching. See you soon. Bye.